I am delighted to introduce Denise. I met her when I went to Art Parts when I first moved to Boulder right before the pandemic lockdown. And I tried to get her to negotiate a lower price on a Bernina serger, and she would not. So then I realized, and I love the serger, I bought it.
Because you knew it was still a great deal.
It was still a great deal. But I realized then, before her, I knew nothing else about Denise, that she was a force to be reckoned with. A smart, savvy businesswoman who ran a great enterprise. I have now since learned that she is a magnificent beader. She makes beautiful things. She repairs expensive ancient stuff. And so when we were looking for a bead-focused program tonight, we were so happy she said yes. And since then, she's been elected our president. So yay, Denise, over to you.
Thank you. Elizabeth, are you ready for me to share my screen?
Yep. Yes.
Right, let's begin. Hello, everyone. And thanks for joining me for this slideshow on tools and techniques for creating 2- and 3-dimensional beaded fabrics. Beadwork looks complicated, but it's deceptively simple. I think it's easier than knitting. We'll be covering how to create true beaded fabric, defined as any flat or 3-dimensional fabric created with beads stitched or otherwise connected to each other, as opposed to beads stitched to a fabric backing or substrate, which I think of as bead embroidery. I'll be sharing the many possibilities that a needle, thread, some inexpensive glass seed beads, and a few key beading stitches can add not just to your textile art repertoire, but other art mediums too. We're going to define glass seed beads simply as beads the size of seeds, and we'll refer to them throughout this talk as just seed beads. So the history of glass beads is fascinating because their invention transformed global trade. Glass beads have been around since the Egyptians invented glass around 1365 BCE, but it's Venice that vaulted their popularity around the world starting in the 10th century. Glass beads became such a valuable trade commodity in the Middle Ages that even African slaves could be traded for a pouch of glass beads. In 1291, Venice moved their glass factories to the island of Murano, not just to minimize fires in the city from the hot glass kilns, but to preserve the lucrative secrets of glass bead making, where workers could be punished with death for revealing trade secrets. In the 18th century, Venice was producing over 100,000 glass bead varieties. By the 1880s, they were shipping over 6 million pounds of seed beads annually to the U.S. to satisfy demand to Native American and Victorian markets. While we're on the subject of antique beads, take a look at the tiniest beads the world has ever seen. Compare these to the 10-inch long modern hank of size 11 silver-lined beads at center of this slide. The two short hanks above the silver beads are size 20 faceted beads, where 20 beads fill 1 inch. The black faceted beads at top right are glass, but the silver hank at top left, those are actual steel cuts. Those are faceted steel beads that haven't been made since the mid-19th century. They were quite heavy on a bead knitted purse, and they had a tendency to tarnish, which was helpful in figuring out what they were made out of. At far right are the tiniest beads ever made at size 22 to 24. I sometimes have to use these when I'm restoring antique beadwork, and it's so time consuming because I have to use a special needle the diameter of a hair to even thread them. When they get stuck under my nails, I can't even feel them. Modern beaders call them micro beads. Antique hanks like those top two are almost always shorter than modern hanks. I'm one of just 3 American beadwork restorers who offer our services to the public. It's very satisfying to restore a beautiful bead knitted bag like this because antique beadwork was largely created by women. So this is our collective textile art history, our collective female textile art history. That's worthy of preservation. I feel an almost sacred duty to use my skills to restore family heirlooms and other historical beaded artifacts. Antique bead knitted purses like these were particularly challenging to create because every bead had to be threaded on purse silk before knitting could even begin. Skip just one bead while following a charted pattern, and your entire purse motif would be ruined. Unfortunately, a great many antique Victorian beaded purses don't age well because the materials contribute to their deterioration. Antique beads can have sharp bead holes that'll cut the threads, and the weight of all those beads, the stresses of that, eventually breaks the threads as they age, especially the fringes. In my opinion, bead knitting created and still creates when made like this, where there is one bead in each knit stitch. That, of all fabrics, is the most sensuously supple beaded fabric ever made. It's one reason why antique purses remain a popular collector's item. So while the industrial age brought us machine beaded purses, the popularity of glass beads has continued to grow, and new colors and finishes are always hitting the market. They remain the best choice for beaded fabric because they come in 10 sizes, with size 11 being the most popular. They come in 2,000 colors, styles, and finishes. They're mostly color fast and impervious to UV damage, and they're still inexpensive. The beadwork sample shown here shows us how beads are sized. So the larger the number, the smaller the bead. A size 2 can be threaded on a shoelace, while tiny size 15s, the smallest size still made, work well for richly detailed images. The sampler illustrates how bead sizes correspond to how many beads fit within 1 inch. So size 11 beads fit side by side within 1 inch. Amongst those popular size 11s, you have 2 choices. Check beads, also called rocailles, are imperfect donuts. Laser-cut Japanese delicas or mayuki beads are small marbles because every bead is perfect. I prefer check beads because they come in 400 colors and finishes, and they're affordable at $4 to $8 per hank. This matters when I'm working on something large like a valance, and I might need 20 hanks of beads. I also really like the folk art quality they lend to my pieces. Japanese laser cuts only come in 3 sizes and 15 colors and cost about 83 cents a gram. So the price difference is considerable. Beading needles. They have eyes the same size as the needle so they can easily pass through a bead hole, unlike regular sewing needles where the eye is usually bigger than the needle. Their sizes correspond to bead sizes. For size 11 beads, my favorites are 2-inch long John James English beading needles in sizes 12 and 13. Collapsible eye needles at center, what look like little hairs up there, are handy for restoration work with tiny beads because the wire eye collapses each time you pull it through the bead hole. But they have a blunt end that can't pierce fabric. So when I have to use these for restoration work with micro beads, I have to thread the beads first on the collapsible eye needle, then switch to a size 12 beading needle so I can pierce the fabric to attach the beads to it. Big eye needles at bottom are fine doubled wires where the entire needle is an eye, making it easier to thread beads from either end. But it too has blunt ends that can't pierce fabrics. Okay, full disclosure. The most frustrating part of seed bead work for many new beaders is threading those small needles. But it does get easier with practice. Try these tips if you're having trouble. Flatten the thread with your fingers first, wet the needle's eye, and then thread the needle. Wear readers like I do or magnifying glasses, and use a needle threader if you're having trouble. Beadwork requires some tugging and needs to be able to withstand the occasional sharp glass bead hole, so regular sewing thread isn't strong enough. Nymo spools, pictured here at top left, are strong nylon thread that come in 10 colors and 4 sizes and are the standard choice for beaded fabric. My favorite is Nymo B, or medium, because it allows for numerous thread passes through many seed bead sizes. Big hanging bead projects like window valances need something stronger that won't stretch, because imagine how heavy a beaded valance is made of thousands of bits of heavy glass. So the strong braided steel thread like Wildfire or Fireline really works great. To the right here, I use Thread Heaven as my silicone thread conditioner to help detangle thread, but beeswax or even a candle work just fine. Finger cots help for quick beading with thin needles, and a sharp pair of TSA-approved folding scissors are great for traveling. Also handy, metal or plain white glass tea bag dishes, which help you easily stab beads onto needles. So beads, needles, and thread are all you really need to get started, but other helpful tools are craft wire for shaped work like French beaded flowers, pattern books and specialty graph papers, and an Indian bead loom. So let's linger on the possibilities of beads strung on wire for a moment. Most of us are familiar with French beaded flowers made from this combination, but seed beads strung on wire offer so many possibilities for shaping, and the vessels and other two-dimensional layers that can be created are limitless. Is it fabric? The Textile Museum in DC says it is. I'd say yes too. Even if that fabric is rigid and is attached to each other to look like a bunch of loose horizontal weft threads. So stringing beads on wire is faster than stringing them on thread, although size 11 seed beads, no matter what you're doing with size 11 beads, it's all time consuming. So here's a vintage milk crate that I took months and months. I don't know what I was thinking. I thought it would go quicker. Don't try this at home. It's nice to be married to somebody who's as much of a scavenger as me, because my husband David is the one who often brings home the interesting discards to work with, like this vintage egg basket whose wood handles had rotted away decades ago, and he happened to find in an Aspen alley in the years when he worked there. Discarded containers offer so many opportunities for beaded embellishments, and it's so satisfying to be challenged to bring out the beauty or utility in somebody else's trash. I am a big fan of this woman's work. Nancy Kronenberg is an important wire artist who weaves, knits, and crochets copper and steel wires into evocative abstract sculptures. Her art is in the permanent collection of the Textile Art Museum in DC, and we can even see her work here in Denver because she is represented by Space Gallery there, as well as other gallery reps across America. So now that we know mostly what tools we need, let's move on to simple beading techniques. We'll begin with one of my favorites, bead weaving. True bead weaving is created with warp stretched along any loom or sturdy frame, just like regular weaving. But instead of yarn, beads are threaded so that each bead rests between two warps. You press the beads between the warps from below and then lock them into place by passing through all those beads again from above. It's simple enough for 6-year-olds, creates a sturdy, supple fabric, and in my opinion, is very addictive. Check out the many excellent YouTube videos to help get you started. Here's probably the most famous bead weaver on the planet. This is Jeanette Algren. She's a well-known artist who threads beads onto wire to weave luminous structures inspired by landscapes and Native American textiles. Her work is collected around the world and is in the permanent collection of the Museum of Art and Design in New York City, amongst others. Another favorite bead weaver of a completely different kind is Laura Willits. Her luminous weavings start with her own drawings, which she scans to create a cartoon to bead from. She says the hardest part can be limiting her bead palette to 50 colors or less per piece. Bead weaving can be replicated without a loom using square stitch. It's fast and easy. You don't have to weave in any warp ends when you're finished, like with bead weaving. And bead weaving and square stitch patterns are interchangeable. Since it takes 3 thread passes per bead to create, it's not nearly as supple as loom weaving. I wouldn't use it for a beaded window valance because all that thread would block the light from illuminating the beads. Still, it has its applications, and as the square stitched leaf at center shows, square stitch doesn't have to be square. Peyote stitch is one of the oldest bead stitches in the world, and it goes back to Egypt's Old Kingdom in 2649 BCE. It's the first stitch most beaders learn because it's simple yet very versatile. Bead holes face left, right, and nestle together like bricks. An even number of beads, called even count peyote, is good for flat beadwork, like this first window valance I ever created in this photo from Beadwork Magazine. It took 9 weeks to complete. Leave Me Alone is the piece which began my seed bead fabric addiction. When my pregnant belly made weaving at my loom uncomfortable, I decided I wanted to try beading curtain fabric, undulations, and all. This idea consumed me because I'd loved refracting glass ever since I was 9 years old, when I discovered the prisms my mom triple strand Austrian crystal necklace made when I swung it around in the sun. I swung that necklace so many times in all the sunny windows in my house growing up in Connecticut that, of course, I finally broke it. But light and prisms through colored glass continue to be the inspiration for all of my beaded balances. Swarovski crystal beads add the leaded glass that create the prisms, and the transparent colored beads add the glow. Here's another window valance called Tunisian Carpet, created in 3-drop peyote stitch, or 3 beads per stitch, and took 1 year to complete. Each band is from a traditional Berber carpet motif I learned during the Peace Corps, such as you can see in the center with the red background, camels, and also with a red background closer to the top, unruly man at the assembly. That's my favorite. What I learned since making it in 1998 is that 3 horizontal beads per stitch is too many. The hanging glass beads are just too heavy, so small gaps are starting to appear between the rows. Because of this, I no longer use this stitch for window balances. So you'd think that anyone who loved beading like me would want to take on year-long projects, right? Doesn't that sound like fun? But weirdly, I could find hardly any other beaders online who created flat, large-scale beaded fabrics. Luckily, fellow Handweavers Guild of Boulder member Linda Gray joins me in the minority to create some beautiful window balances. This piece, called Sunrise Sunset in Memory of Dad, uses 2-drop peyote stitch and fringes to marvelous effect. Linda's ice ball valance is sheer pale opulence in 3 different bead stitches. Note how she even beads the curtain rods, a wonderful touch. Virus valance at bottom, use peyote, brick stitch, and fringing to create not just a lovely lacy openwork design, but interesting curtain rod loops as well. Circular or odd count peyote stitch is one of my very favorite stitches because it gives a textile artist like me, used to creating flat weavings, the excitement of working 3-dimensionally. Many of us also appreciate the fact that almost any object can be covered in beads, and the gleaming pixelation that results looks more complex than it is. Here are 3 of my figural pieces done in peyote stitch over found objects. Butchering La Boheme at left is made over a vintage martini glass. The Many First at center is made on old Pier 1 import candle holders. And Fashionista was created over an antique strawberry pincushion like the one pictured at right. I learned that antique pincushions make good armatures because they're stuffed with malleable sawdust that's easy to shape and then bead over. The Freaks Ride the Ferris Wheel is the most ambitious 3D piece I've ever beaded. It was inspired by the discarded flower pot wheel my husband found in our neighborhood on trash day, and includes my 21st century freaks. So clockwise from top, the misogynist throws popcorn onto the trophy wife. The sports fanatic is below her. The religious fundamentalist argues with the bigot standing at bottom. The animal hater is worried about the homophobe above her, in detail at right, on the Ferris wheel with his dog. One of the most famous bead artists in the world is MacArthur Genius Grant awardee Joyce Scott. She redefined the boundaries of beadwork in the 70s by being one of the first to render the human figure in seed beads without internal armatures. As the granddaughter of slaves and the daughter of a celebrated quilt maker, many of her artworks have a folk art patchwork quality, made more distinct by the addition of found objects. Her sculptures and neck pieces tackle issues such as racism, misogyny, and the struggles of being Black in America in bold ways that are both personal and universal. The overriding theme of Joyce's work is man's inhumanity to man, or shall we say, inhumanity to women. And this is evident in her raw and poignant Day After Rape series. These powerful pieces cast rape as a dehumanizing act simply by making some of them headless, such as gathering water at bottom right. Joyce is the queen of sculptural seed beadwork because she conveys important Black American themes and women's issues in ways you can't ignore. Now, on to more lighthearted sculptural beadwork. Circular peyote, or odd count peyote, meaning an odd number of beads per horizontal row, is favored by sculptural bead artists for its ease in increasing and decreasing. Kate McKinnon at top right uses Japanese beads to create complex geometric pieces, and her beading books and tutorials highlight her mastery over complex techniques. Wendy Ellsworth at bottom right is an internationally known teacher and artist from North Carolina who creates fanciful 3D forms inspired by nature and sea life. Linda Fiffield and her husband make their own wood-turned vessels in their Kentucky barn, Linda then embellishes with her own peyote stitch designs. Former puppet maker and longtime beader Liz Manfredini creates some of the most detailed beaded figures out there. Each cheerful figure is perfectly rendered and proportioned, and I'm a huge fan of her work. Kathy Musselwright at bottom left is an enigma with no web presence, but I deeply admire this absolutely sumptuous piece with lamp-worked fish. It's perfection. I think it beautifully reveals the fluidity that peyote stitch is capable of. Natasha Saint-Michel is a celebrated bead artist from Montreal whose work explores cellular formations. And she has many other pieces similar to this, all made in small pieces to create a larger whole. This piece uses a regular circle stitched together to include negative space so that light moves in multiple ways through the piece. Like Joyce Scott, her work has a patchwork quality, but what I find even more interesting about her work is that these are mostly meant to hang, and they don't rest on tables as you might expect. It's impossible to include all of the sculptural bead artists whose work I admire. So let's close this peyote stitch section with Marina Nosova, who created this airy beadwork over a light fixture, and Uliana Volhovskaya, whose beads charming figures and animals with technical precision. On to my favorite bead stitch for hanging beadwork, brick stitch. This easy stitch also nestles together like bricks, but it lets more light through the beads because they're attached to each other by loops between the beads. After my Tunisian carpet valance, I wanted a stitch with a vertical orientation that would handle the weight of glass beads better. And 2-drop brick stitch turned out to be the perfect choice. Medieval Village, pictured here, has hung in my stairway in Eastern light for 19 years, and it hasn't faded or stretched at all. It was inspired by a 17th century woodcut of Krakow, Poland I once saw in a medieval architecture book. This 2-drop brick stitch valance was created for a Florida friend and took 400 hours to complete. It was challenging to create in pieces and then sew together. I experimented a lot with construction, and I needed multiple cartoons so that all the parts would be stable without gaping or flopping over. Brick stitch is a very popular stitch for earrings because it's sturdy and so easy to shape. However, it's hardly used for sculptural beadwork due to its stiffness. Here also are 2 brick stitch valances, the top by me and the bottom by Connecticut beader Mel Jonason. On to right angle weave, our next bead technique. It's the last of the 5 bead stitches I want to share and the most versatile for the way the gaps between the beaded squares can be manipulated and filled with other beads. Because of the gaps, it's incredibly supple. It's a very old technique used by numerous South African and Indian cultures throughout history. And one could spend an entire lifetime exploring this stitch and still not exhaust everything it could do. Traditionally, it was created with 2 needles. The modern master of right angle weave is David Chatt. He pioneered the technique known as single needle right angle weave, eliminating the need for a second needle. The supple fabric created can be used to create 3D forms with or without an armature. And they can cover almost any surface, as he illustrates here in this piece called 108 Meditations in Saffron. The Corning Museum of Glass, by the way, has the most prestigious collection of glass art in the country. So if David Chatt is in their collection, he must be a big deal. David Chatt's sense of humor is often revealed through his work. White men in suits, pictured in its fullness at right, and then a detail at center. To me, it's just superb in technique, in concept, in scale. It's just fabulous in every way. This beaded box by David Chatt is not a box covered in right angle weave. The entire box creates the stitch, which makes this a beaded engineering marvel and a testament to the incredible versatility of this stitch. Seed beads don't have to be stitched. They can also be glued, as numerous bead artists have discovered. One of the most collected amongst them is Jan Hewling, who covers found objects with a beaded mandala technique that looks more complex than it is. She's been accused of appropriating indigenous Mexican huichol beadwork because her work does resemble their work of beads pressed into beeswax. But it's absolutely not. It's her masterful color work and the way she creates bead patterns on the thread as she works wider and wider. That's what gives her work its color and distinctiveness. I also like that she calls herself a beadist and not a beader. This large valance also took a year to complete and included so many experiments in wire wrapping and what glue would hold up in bathroom humidity that I needed to keep a journal that eventually became a Beadwork Magazine article. It's my favorite valance of all because I love how the western sun illuminates the Swarovski crystals, the 27 glass tile colors, and the negative diamonds between the tiles. The beaded and glued frames are holding up just fine above our jacuzzi. Other notable bead gluers are Betsy Youngquist at top right and Nancy Josephson at center bottom. Nancy's works are in the collections of Bob Dylan, Susan Sarandon, the estate of Robin Williams, and the American Visionary Art Museum, my very favorite museum in the whole country. Tom and Kathy Wegman at left and top are the old timers of the bead gluers. They favored good old-fashioned Elmer's non-toxic glue to create their art as they always have. Their work includes a wry sense of humor and an appreciation for rusted vintage discards and their work is also widely collected. No seed bead presentation would be complete without paying homage to Liza Liu, pictured here, who, like Joyce Scott, is a MacArthur Genius Grant awardee. Liza's important because she elevated the craft of beading into the contemporary fine art world by exaggerating the scale to be so much more than embellishment. She's best known for this 168 square foot piece called Kitchen from 1995. It's constructed of 10 million glass seed beads and took 5 years to complete, which Liza likes to compare to the endless drudgery of housework. The beads are threaded on wire and then glued to custom wood and papier-mâché substrates until every surface is covered. So Liza also made all the substrates as well as doing all the beading. Liza got kicked out of her art program at San Francisco College of Art and Design in the 90s because she refused to stop using beads as her primary medium. I'm glad she persisted with a material she loved too much to abandon, and we're all the richer for it. The headline on the newspaper on the kitchen table under her arm says, "Housewife beads the world." And I really think that says it all. Throughout her career, Liza has continued to work with sheer beaded scale, like in this piece called Backyard. Years ago at the Loveland Museum, Liza invited the public to help her bead blades of grass on wire, and damn it, I missed it. Other spectacular pieces are an entirely beaded trailer home and the faces of every U.S. president completely beaded in gold metallics. I bow to Queen Liza and her big, bold, beady, beautiful vision. So here are the glues that I found work best for seed beads. My go-to glues are Elmer's non-toxic glue for working with kids and lightweight bits, GS Hyper Cement for itty-bitty parts that need precise applications, E6000 Industrial Cement for heavy items, and my all-time favorite, Eileen's Glass and Bead Glue. As a bead artist who collects folk art, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the many talented Indigenous people around the world who mastered seed beadwork centuries before we white Americans. It's thanks in part to their generous teaching that modern beaders have the wealth of beading skills we still use today. We're indebted to the Indigenous beaders who continue to enrich and inspire modern seed bead art well into the 21st century and hopefully beyond. There are thousands of talented bead artisans around the globe creating art with seed beads in markets that include fashion, folk and indigenous art, home decor, upcycling, and of course, jewelry. One of the most oversaturated markets on the planet. Since the world has enough jewelry to circle the globe multiple times, I decided decades ago that my beadwork would not contribute to that excess. So while there are many, many jewelry artists creating beautiful work with seed beads, I've chosen in this talk to highlight the 3% of beaders who create very little jewelry or no accessories. I'm hoping to encourage us to have more patience in our creative projects, where our artists' eyes can imagine big, bold ideas that are inventive, ingenious, illuminating, and maybe so grand and powerful in scale that yes, it might take a year or 5 to finish. But we bead artists are a patient bunch who enjoy the meditative quality of beadwork in a noisy world. So I hope I've inspired you to try your hand at experimenting with these glorious, gleaming bits of glass, whatever your medium. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. That was awesome. There aren't currently any questions in the chat. If anyone has a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and you can ask Denise directly.
Good. Maybe that means I explained it well enough. It felt dense.
Denise, that was wonderful.
Thank you.
You should take it on the road. Do you find beads that you can use at junk shops?
Yes. So
Yeah.
Art Parts always has a wonderful collection of contemporary and antique seed beads because I'm often looking for both. Half the time I have my own seed bead project going, but I'm also restoring an antique bag. And so I try to use antique beads for antique work so that they are museum quality. That's my goal. And I don't care whether I use antique or contemporary in my own beadwork.
Babs asked, how do you tell if a bead is an antique?
So one way is to tell the length of the hank. So remember when we were looking at the antique seed beads and the short hanks, those little 2-inch hanks? So that's one way to tell them. Sometimes their colors, well, steel cut beads are definitely antiques because they no longer make those steel cut beads. There. The size will often tell you if they're super tiny, like those micro beads at right, well, they haven't made those for over 100 years, so we know those are antiques. If the color has worn off the inside, like use it, for example, that 10-inch long hank of silver-lined beads at center, the outside of the bead is actually clear, and it has a silver core inside. So very often an antique bead, that inner core has been worn away from multiple thread passes and being scratched off with other needles in the past. So a lining in bad condition can also tell too. And sometimes really dirty. Dirty alone can also tell you that bead holes with time get stuffed with dirt. So that can tell you that it's an old bead also.
Thank you. Okay, I'll ask my next question.
All right.
Have you seen at the Crazy Horse Museum the collection of glass beads? It's like a huge wall of tons of beads. It's gorgeous.
No. Where's the Crazy Horse Museum?
South Dakota, by Custer.
Finally, a reason to go to South Dakota.
It is.
I
It
was
was
just-
a great museum.
I'm just amazed by the range of colors. It was probably 40 feet and 5 feet high of just
Wow.
things.
Okay, I'll go check it out. Hey, and so back at you on Good Museums with amazing beadwork collections. If you've never been to the Buffalo Bill Museum in Golden,
Oh, yeah.
wow.
Oh,
So Buffalo, they have a whole glass case is filled with exquisite Native American beadwork, but also other beaded items and collections of beads, because he encouraged the Native Americans who worked on the Wild West show with him to do their beadwork on the off times. So they would often sit and bead while they were waiting for the next show to come on, or the tent to fill with oglers, etc. It's a really excellent museum, not just for the exceptionally beaded buckskin, and how dashing Buffalo Bill was in that yellow deck, in that fringed work.
mm.
Lynn asked, how do you thread such tiny beads?
Yeah. So let's go back to the needle. So that center needle, that collapsible eye needle, that is the needle that is the diameter, roughly the diameter of a thick hair. And it's two impossibly thin wires twisted together with the collapsible eye at one end. So that is the only thing. If you ever see a size 15 or rarer still, a size 16 beading needle, oh, buy that up for me and I will pay you back, because they're almost impossible to find. You know how we were talking about how the needle size corresponds to the bead size. So they don't even make size 18, 17 size, those needles or more. And it's no wonder that they stopped making those tiny beads in the 1840s, because they didn't even have electricity then. How could the Victorian women and the Native women could probably only work sitting out in full sunshine to even be able to see them? It's no wonder they didn't last very long, because, geez, once you've lost them behind your fingernails, they're gone.
Wow.
I have a question. I have found, and Mercedes warned me about this, and it's happened with with the silver line beads.
Yes.
They tarnish,
Uh-huh.
and so they're not bright and sparkly like they used to be. Is there a way to get that tarnish off?
No. So I once worked on a beaded bag that was a very large 12-inch plus bag, all made out of size 18 antique steel cuts, and they were filthy. And since the whole fringe was just a mess anyway, and the client wanted it redone, she asked if I would also try to clean the tarnish off the steel cut fringe beads. And I said yes. And it took me 3 days to soak them in a vinegar and water solution, and then carefully dry a few at a time between paper towels, and then let them dry in the sun so there was no water still left in the bead holes that
Yeah.
rot or weaken my beading thread as I worked. So once the silver lining or any colored lining is gone in the center of a bead, it's gone. And sometimes that's not tarnished, Joanne, because silver lined beads, very often, and especially in modern beads, that's not real silver. It's just a kind of silver foil to mimic silver. It's
Oh, that's plausible. But I've, the ones that are, still in the, that I
Hanks.
haven't used yet are still fine. But
Uh-huh.
the ones in the snowflakes that have been hanging in the windows are, gone very gray.
Yeah. So of all the glass seed beads out there, the color lined beads, silver, copper colored, pink. So you could have a pink silk color lined purple bead. So the outer glass is one color and the inner glass is a different color.
Uh-huh.
And as you continue to pass your bead and your needle and thread through the color lining, it will wear it away. And then reds and pinks and purples are the most susceptible to UV damage.
Oh, yeah, I've noticed that.
Yeah, there's something about the gold that they use to make those bead colors that makes them, allows them to be damaged in UV light, unlike most all other seed beads. It's one of the things I love about them is that you can have a sculpture sitting in the sun for 25 years and it never fades, unlike a nice woven rug,
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, have you tried putting the worn beads, with the holes worn out, in some kind of a dye and soaking them like that and then rubbing it all off and letting it dry?
No. Hell no, Gina.
Do you think you could do something like that? Yeah. Hi, it's Gina.
You've seen it done?
No, it just came, I don't know. I just popped in my head and I thought, wonder if you've tried that.
So that
Like
sounds
even like
super time consuming. Do you
yeah,
know, I mean, we're talking 11 beads per inch of these size 11 beads,
Mhm.
the
Oh, they're pretty
common, the
small,
most
yeah.
popular size. So
right.
it's a lot of beads to try to dye. I'm
Yeah.
happy if I can even get the caked on dirt. If I
Yeah.
can get that out of, 100-year-old glass
Uh-huh.
seed beads,
Yeah.
wow, that feels like a big victory.
Wow.
So
Wow.
we are talking about very small bead holes.
Yeah. Right.
So it's
So
hard
just
to get
getting them-
anything in there.
Yeah, and getting them it cleared out to sit there and go through each one.
Yeah.
Now that would be the time-consuming part of
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. It already takes enough time.
Right. That you just threaded them on something and then just, moved them around to try and dry them.
Yeah.
You know,
Some people have done
So-
that actually, where they'll just put a thick white cotton thread, and
Yeah.
then they'll just thread a bunch of beads, not to
Mhm.
color them, but to clean them.
yeah, just to clean them. Wow.
Yeah, and that can get some of the dirt out of some of the antique beads, but some of them are just, they're gone.
Yeah. Well, really enjoyed your program tonight. It
Thank
was
you.
So glad I caught it. Thank you.
Sure.
He
I'm-
asked, where are glass beads still produced, and are there any made in the U.S.?
Oh, good question. None are made in the U.S. We have never made our own glass beads. We've made lots of other beads, thanks to Native Americans, shell beads, cowrie shells, wood beads, but none of them could ever get to the smallness of what could be produced by glass. So we never made them here. But we did have production companies that made purses, like the Whiting and Davis, that was out of England. But we had a few companies that would replicate beaded purses at the late 1880s, early 20th century. Most beads, though, the Japanese laser cut beads, I don't know where they're made in Japan, to be honest, but the check seed beads, those are made by a company called Jablonix that is just as secretive in the 21st century as they were in the 10th. And that's because they continue to be extremely lucrative and with inexpensive materials. So you have to be a very large wholesaler to get a tour of the Jablonix glass bead factory in the Czech Republic. So damn, I'll never get to go. Did that answer your question?
I'm Rosemary. I'm new, and I was wondering, I'm pretty new to the area, and I've done some sculptural bead weaving. Where in this part of the state is a really good place to buy beads that has a good selection of 15s, 10s, besides just 11s?
We Boulderites are so lucky to have nomad bead merchants.
Yeah, but he doesn't have very many seed beads.
Are you kidding? So
For just seed beads, like 11s, like that carries the full
Yeah. So
check
he's
color
got
lines.
he's got that wall of them. I see what you mean though. So that, most of the things in the window are more jewelry beads, and they don't have a huge selection.
No,
It's
they
hard
don't.
to beat the online selection where you
Yep.
have all 2,000 colors
Yep.
and all the sizes available.
Yes.
But what Nomad is still a superlative bead supply store in downtown Boulder at the corner of Walnut and 9th Street, a block off the Pearl Street Mall, because they have all the needles, all the threads, an incredible selection of findings, but lots of antique beads.
No, he
And
does. He
lots
does
of-
have some antiques, but I
Yeah.
was thinking, when you need to go and buy 12 colors and you want all
Yes.
different finishes, he doesn't have a huge selection. There's a great bead store in Colorado Springs, and it's called Beads and Needs. And
Yes.
she really has good stuff in all sizes, and she carries all the colors.
You said in Colorado Springs?
Yeah, it's Beads and Needs, and it's
Well, if I
worth
get
the
down
trip.
to Colorado Springs, I'll look for that.
Yes, she's on the east side. It's in a small off Constitution, because I used to live in the Springs before I lived here, off Constitution, and she will order colors for you that she doesn't have in stock. She'll do
Oh,
special
that's nice.
orders for you.
Well, that's
I
cool.
wonder-
So Jake will do that at Nomad.
Oh, he
also.
will? He will?
Yes,
Because I
but-
know I've gotten stones there and
Yeah.
unique antique beads, but just for your garden variety, when you want all your colors and all, and because I need to see them and feel them.
Right. And that's the thing about buying them online. So
Yes.
I've stopped buying my seed beads online. I was lucky when I worked at Art Parts that I would buy the antique beads because they're very hard to find at this point, and they become rarer by the year.
Yeah. I just
So
wonder if there's anyone in
can't-
Denver who does just a big seed. There used to be Promenade Beads in Boulder.
Oh, I remember
years
that
ago.
place.
yeah,
Yeah, I bought stuff there.
that's been closed for decades.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
So
but I don't know if there's one in Denver.
I
don't know.
can't think of one offhand. But what I was going to say is the reason I don't buy any more seed beads online is because I can't match the colors that way.
Yeah. Yep.
Like you said, you have to see them in the flesh, especially if you're trying to exactly match weird antique bead colors that might not have been made since, the 1900s. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So that's why I always make sure I have a good stash. So I have plenty of beads to choose from, plenty of antique seed beads to choose from.
Yeah. So just Beads and Needs she carries a huge selection. And I haven't been in there since before COVID, but she carries all the check lines. She really does. She has a nice selection. So I was
Nice.
spoiled.
Thank you for the tip.
I guess I was spoiled.
Yeah, a thing that I was trying to figure out before, Denise, and I think you helped with this, was to figure out what are the sizes that I have, because I don't, I know I have a lot of 11s, but that's what I mostly have. But you said however many you fit in an inch, that's
Yes.
the size.
So the trick, Joanne, is to make sure that you have bead holes facing up and down. So it's not how many you can string and fit in an inch. It's how many with bead holes facing up and down fit into 1 inch. That's why this sample here is so valuable to see.
I see that.
Yeah. Very often when I ask clients, so I can tell if it's micro beads and I have to charge more, they want to measure with bead holes facing side by
Well,
side.
it's easy to measure because I was just trying to measure something and put a needle through it and measure that, but I can see that's not the way to do it.
Right.
But I'm trying to figure out with this workshop tomorrow night, and we're supposed to have size 6, and I don't think I'm that big.
Okay, well, here's 6. So at the far left here, Joanne,
Yeah,
those are
that's
size 6s.
Yeah, I
And
can see that.
it would be easy for you to just use regular sewing needles since they're pretty big. Thread a bunch of size 6s.
I don't
Or
have size 6.
beads you think are size 6s.
I think I don't have any. If
I don't think it's going to matter that much.
I'm sorry,
well,
turn
I
over to
got some
Michael's.
here that seem to be
Yeah.
8.
Michael's will have size 6 beads. One tube would do you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 1, 2. Yeah. Well, nowadays I don't.
Oh, and our parts too would have size 6s for sure.
And at Maverick, we have size 6s as well.
At
Well,
where?
Maverick.
Tomorrow's going to be very cold, and I'd rather not leave the house. And I really don't want to leave Longmont. So that would put me at Michael's. We used to have a bead store in Longmont. It was very nice.
It was a nice bead store, but that died with the pandemic.
Oh, that died long before the
Or
pandemic.
before, yes.
Oh, yeah, that's been gone a long time. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, we've been here 16, almost 17 years now, and it was probably at least 10 years ago that they closed.
Hmm.
But so I'll figure out I have probably a bunch of 6s or perhaps 8s. I probably have some 8s. I'll give those a try tomorrow.
Now you know how to roughly measure them, so you'll have a
Yeah.
good idea, at least an approximate idea of how big they are.
Some of these are kind of square, so I can line those up and see what they are. But I've tended to buy things in tubes lately. That's what I'm finding rather than in hanks. I don't think I bought hanks since Promenade closed.
Really?
Yeah, there's
That's why I like Nomad, because you can still buy them on Hanks.
thanks. They're
Yeah, but
starting
when
to
I've been
stock
in there,
in
there wasn't
tubes.
a good selection of beads that I want. I have gotten findings there, and I love my big eye needles.
Yes, they're
I
great.
tell you, if the bead won't go over my big eye needle, I'm not using it.
Fair enough.
I'm down to one. I don't know what happened to the other ones. I need to go get more.
I think now the Czech companies are still putting them on Hanks, but
Yes.
some of the Japanese or the other there's I don't know if they're out of China, I'm not sure, where they're also pretty consistent from size to size. They're starting to do them in cylinders
Yes.
and
Well,
all those
they can-
newfangled shapes that they have.
They can charge more when they put them in tubes, plastic tubes. Because when you see the 13, 10-inch long threads and know you have, what did we say? One hank is about 4,000 beads, about 30 grams. So to be able to charge you by the gram for what wholesale, they got 4,000 beads for $2 from Jablonix, that's a high markup on inexpensive glass Czech beads. And there are no bargains on the Delicas unless you buy them online in some kind of bulk. They'll just always be expensive because the laser cutting process is expensive.
Mhm.
Well, I've been, the kind of bead, I don't use lots of beads at once, so the cost of them has not been an issue for me.
Sure.
But I'm inspired to maybe try to do a bead valance, and I'm going, okay, well then I would need a whole lot of beads, and I would have to pay more attention to what they cost.
Right. Yeah. It's really hard to beat online prices, especially when you need any sort of volume.
I have a question about the antique restoration stuff.
Yeah.
Do you mostly do like the knit purse, or is it like individual beads, or is it a little bit of everything?
It's a little bit of everything.
Okay.
So I've repaired Native American beadwork. I've repaired 1918 Turkish prisoner of war crocheted snakes that men would make in the trenches. So had to learn bead crochet before I could repair bead crochet.
Oh, wow.
And everything in between. I will try my hand at almost anything. I know I'm the steward of that person's thing, and in some cases, it's the only thing left that a granddaughter might have from her grandmother, for example. And that matters to her. So I will often try, but I make them send it to me so I can see it and feel it in person, so I can see how big the beads are. But I'm willing to try most anything. The hardest thing to fix, Elizabeth, antique-wise, is a loom woven bag where the warps have started to disintegrate.
Mhm.
So many beads have fallen away, very often under the purse clasp, where the hinges are that open and close the purse. It takes a lot of stress there. And so parts of beaded bags often deteriorate there. And there's no fixing that, because once the warps are gone, I could try going through the beads that are available, but I need something to add. I need some thread to add the new beads to. And if there's no warp, I can't recreate fabric from air, because I can only go through those antique bead holes so many times.
Yeah.
They're often already stuffed with thread. Well, often antique beads won't accept another thread pass, and I can't fix that either.
Do you have like a favorite technique that you're like, whenever you get one, you're like, ooh, I'm excited to do this?
Or least favorite?
I really love working like this piece here. Oh,
Oh,
this piece on the right with that
that's gorgeous.
very complex netted fringe with then
Mhm.
extra fringes on the bottom. And then, oh, because there wasn't enough fringy wonderfulness going on, big eyes at the bottom of the fringes,
Yeah.
different colors in the junctures of the bead netting.
Uh-huh.
Oh, that is like bead heaven. Even though that damn needle is so small at the bottom, that looks like a hair underneath it,
Man, no
that's what I
kidding.
have to work with.
Oh,
That I can restore that to its former glory and even better, that is deeply satisfying. And so sometimes the harder it is, the more satisfaction it brings me because nobody else was willing to take on something that complex with beads that small. But I was her heroine.
Yeah.
That feels good.
yeah, yeah. Nice.
How
Yeah.
old is that gorgeous purse?
So this one with the fruit trees and oh, it almost looks like a unicorn in the bottom left.
Yeah.
I am guessing from the look of the clasp and such that it's probably 1880s, so late 19th century. It's very, very hard to date purses because beads were so coveted at that time. It's not like you could just go to the fabric store and get a hank of, size 22 brown beads. You had to wait for the button guy or the carpetbagger to come through with maybe a few beads that, might seduce you. So you kept every damn bead you had left over in the 19th, 18th centuries when beaded purses were so popular and every woman wanted one and had to learn to make one. So because this might have beads from the 1830s that somebody
Yeah.
still had that blue that they held on to for something they really wanted to do justice to.
I can't believe what good shape it's in.
It's
Yeah,
incredible.
It's a museum piece. That's a
It
museum piece.
truly is. I did 17 purses for a San Diego collector
Wow.
about 2014, 2015. It took over a year to restore all of them. This too on the other side. So what is part of her collection also, both bags on this slide. And she favored these very rare, very valuable pictorial bead knitted purses. And when I talk about bead knitted fabric, this is what I talk about. Not that picture that Laura Necklin had with 3 beads on a strand on a scarf.
Right.
This stuff where it's
Oh, yeah.
all threaded beforehand and then 1 bead for every knit stitch until the piece is done.
So those are
That's-
both bead knitted?
Yes, they're both bead
So
knitted.
they had to be charted out ahead of time
Yes,
and threaded ahead of
No.
time.
right. All the beads threaded ahead of time, not for just the front, but the back too. The backs were usually just as complex.
Is it knit in the round or knit flat?
It's knit flat. They were always knit flat. And these patterns, so hardly anybody ever drew their own patterns. Godot's Lady Book, Ladies Home Journal, Paris Fashions. There were many, many ladies' magazines that offered charted purse patterns for you to follow with colors. It was getting the beads that was hard. Finding the patterns was easy. Finding the purse silk or the tiny needles, that was tough too.
So these aren't peyote or brick stitch. They are truly knitted.
Knit.
They are true antique bead knitted micro bead purses.
So they have little teeny micro knitting needles.
They have, yes, they use.
Tambour needles, I think is that what they use?
No, a tambour needle
Tambour's different?
is something different. A tambour needle was a punch needle
Yeah.
that almost like an awl that allowed space but no knotting between beads. So no, they used 0 knitting needles down to quadruple 0 knitting needles.
Steel.
Steel needles.
Wow.
Pointed steel knitting.
Oh, I've seen those and I didn't know what they were for.
That's what they're for making these beautiful
Beautiful.
beaded bags.
Ah.
Is anybody still doing this? Maybe.
I do.
don't know. Well, you
I'm
did
still
it.
doing them. So
I mean,
since
knitting-
I'm self-taught, Jane,
uh-huh.
I had to replicate these so I could learn how to repair them. The
Yeah.
way I taught myself to fix them was to make
to
them.
make them.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You had to teach yourself how to knit.
I did.
I mean, I'm not a knitter. I'm only a bead weaver. I don't know how to
Yeah.
knit.
Yeah, well, it was easy because it's just one stitch, just the garter stitch. Just knit, 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 knit after all, and you're sliding one bead at a time
At a
in
time in.
between every knit stitch.
Mhm.
So the knitting's pretty
Mm.
easy. It's
It's
having the beads ahead of time that is super challenging.
and placing them where they sit right
Right,
with each stitch.
right. And then making sure that your pattern fits inside the clasp that, your mom got from the carpetbagger 14 years ago and nobody's used it yet. And, just
Wow.
the availability of materials in 1860s Denver would have made creating something of this complexity and color work it's a true marvel. It's one of the most beautiful pictorial bags I've ever seen and certainly ever worked on. So of course you want to give it your best effort when you're repairing the fringe.
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah. These
Yeah.
are gorgeous. Oh, no, they're gorgeous. I've seen a lot and these are gorgeous.
Yeah, they
So-
are really gorgeous.
Denise, my beading, I used to be a Girl Scout leader and we'd make things with those god awful pony beads. So I
Yes.
don't have a lot of experience, but it was fun. So I have a question about the glued stuff.
Yeah,
So nobody is taking single beads and gluing them like mosaics. They're taking beads on strings and then placing the strings, gluing the string,
exactly.
not individual beads glued.
Exactly.
Okay.
So Liza's doing them on wire. So
On
that's
wire.
much easier than threading beads on thread. It just takes
Yeah.
longer to thread anything on thread. So here's this huachol. Is that how it's pronounced? I hope so. This far left piece of Mexico, where they have
Beautiful.
they've covered a substrate with warm, good-smelling beeswax, and in small sections, they are just pressing the seed beads, bead holes up into that warm beeswax until it dries, and then moving on to the next motif with another slather of warm beeswax until the entire piece is covered.
So you
All
said
the
bead,
other- Go ahead.
sorry, you said bead holes up, so those are not strung.
No, that's bead holes up.
Yeah, boy, that's a lot of work.
Yes.
I mean,
So-
they're all a lot of work, but that would
yes. There's nothing fast about seed bead work. None of it is quick. And that's part of what I love about it. When I know I'm about to start a year-long piece, for example, I am so excited because I'm like, yay, a whole year to look forward to seed bead work. It would roll up in my backpack and I would travel around the world. I worked on Medieval Village while we backpacked through Thailand for a
Oh,
month
wow.
and took the bus. We didn't even have a car. So it travels really well.
Oh, that's
Yeah, a bunch of
that's not something I
Altoid
would have thought of.
Yeah, you wouldn't think so, but it does. You don't want to work it on your tray table on the plane, but I have worked on it many, many times in an airport lounge. So,
Yeah,
So
when I was a kid, my mom really appreciated all of the seed beads in the back of the car.
yes. And that sound of click, 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 as something is vacuuming up all the little bits.
Oh, you know the secret, somebody told me the best tip, you get old pantyhose. You
Mhm.
stick them over the vacuum cleaner hose
Yeah,
and you give it a little slack and you turn on the vacuum and you vacuum up all your loose beads and they will suck into the pantyhose and the pantyhose will suck up a little in the nozzle and then
Yeah.
you turn it off and then you twist it so they all stay in the pantyhose and then
yeah.
you take it out and that's how you get back all your seed beads you dropped.
Oh, yeah.
Genius.
I know, I learned that like 20 years ago.
That's
Nice.
fantastic. Wow.
Okay.
You just
Great.
get down on the floor and run your hand all over
Right.
the
Ones in
You
between the cushions on the sofa.
It works great. You don't get all your lost stuff. But
Mhm.
my other question is the other glue artists, their
Uh-huh.
work, the bead holes are not facing you. Her bead holes are, she's on a, I think she's threading them or on a wire and then gluing them. So her bead holes are not facing us.
Who's that, Liza Lewis?
Well, maybe not where Liza's won't, but even the other bead, the ones that were in the collections of famous people, that there was that art. Yes, these guys.
Yeah.
The holes aren't
Nancy
facing.
Josephson here.
Yeah, so she's a different technique than the Mexican.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So the Mexican beadwork, they're pressing it into warm beeswax with a bead hole up. Whereas Nancy Josephson and Betsy and the Wegmans, they're threading it onto either wire or thread and then gluing that entire strand of wire or thread down. So yes, those bead holes are side to side because they're threaded.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes longer. Well, actually, one bead per time, gingerly pushed down with a toothpick. That's very time consuming
Oh,
also.
gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll try that on something really small.
Yes. Good idea. And leave that out of the sun. You know, of course, Huichol beadwork cannot sit in the sun unlike threaded beadwork can.
Oh,
And they-
because of the wax.
The wax will melt and the beads will fall off.
you can cut a gourd and make small bowls.
It would be like Icarus's, is it Icarus who flew too close to the sun and his wings melted?
Yes. Yes.
Well, that was, again, thank you so much for doing this, Denise.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
It's-
Thank you for being interested.